This is Janice Switlo, and I'm continuing on with my book, Cede 2.0. This is part 13 that begins in the middle of page 56. Given that in the 1990s there was a complete lack of detail as to what the individual agreement was, including who the parties thereto would be, a portion of Cede addressed the possibilities of what that agreement could be, including that it could be a transfer of administration and control between the Crown in right of Canada and the Crown in right of a province. The Crown is indivisible, so when there is a change in ownership, quote unquote, between Canada and a province, there is no sale of the land or right owned. Rather, the conveyance document is called a transfer of administration and control. We now know that the individual agreement under the FNLMA was not referencing a transfer of administration and control because the, quote, First Nation, end of quote, is a party to it. And those can only happen between Her Majesty in right of Canada and Her Majesty in right of the province of, and fill in that blank. Quote, administration and control, section 5, sub 1. A minister may transfer to Her Majesty in right of a province by instrument satisfactory to the Minister of Justice the administration and control of the entire or any lesser interest of Her Majesty in any federal real property, either in perpetuity or for any lesser term. Sub 2. A minister may accept on behalf of Her Majesty a transfer of the administration and control satisfactory to the Minister of Justice of the entire or any lesser interest of Her Majesty in right of a province in any real property, including such transfers made by grant, vesting order, or other conveyancing instrument, either in perpetuity or for any lesser term. Sub 3. In the case of retrocession or reversion to Her Majesty in right of a province or Her Majesty in right of Canada of the administration and control of the entire or any lesser interest in any real property, a minister may give effect to that retrocession or reversion by instrument satisfactory to the Minister of Justice, notwithstanding the requirement in the original transfer of administration and control to proceed by order in council or written notice. This is from the Federal Real Property Regulations, SOR/92-502, Federal Real Property and Federal Immovables Act. In the case of the FNLMA, since the individual agreement is between the new First Nation and the minister, we now know that the minister is acting under, quote, 6 sub 1. A minister may A, transfer the administration of any federal real property to an agent corporation that has the authority under any other act of parliament to acquire the real property, end of quote, and that the individual agreement under the FNLMA is to satisfy section 6 sub 1.1 of the Federal Real Property Regulations. And here I quote it. Administration or administrative responsibility. 6 sub 1. A minister may transfer the administration of any federal real property to another minister or to an agent corporation that has the authority under any other act of parliament to acquire the real property. B. Transfer to another minister the administrative responsibility for a license of which Her Majesty is the licensee. Sub C. Accept the transfer of the administration of any federal real property from another minister or from an agent corporation that has the authority under any other act of parliament to dispose of the real property. And sub D, accept from another minister the transfer of the administrative responsibility for a license of which Her Majesty is the licensee. 6.1.1. A minister shall not A, make a transfer to an agent corporation under paragraph 1A, or B, accept a transfer from an agent corporation under paragraph 1C, unless the transfer is consented to in writing by the agent corporation. Sub 2, every transfer and acceptance referred to in subsection 1 shall be in writing and shall be effective when it is signed by both parties and countersigned by the Minister of Justice. This is again from the Federal Real Property Regulations, SOR/92-502, Federal Real Property and Federal Immovables Act. But they messed up when they passed the FNLMA. They forgot about the requirement of Section 6 sub 1.1 of the Federal Real Property Regulations. This is why they had to amend the FNLMA in 2012 to provide that a land code, although passed, is not in effect until the individual agreement is signed. Quote 15 sub 1, subject to subsection 1.1, a land code comes into force and has the force of law on the day on which it is certified or on any other later date that may be specified in or under the land code, and judicial notice shall be taken of the land code in any proceedings from the date of the coming into force of that land code. 1.1, a land code is not to come into force before the day on which the individual agreement is signed by the First Nation and the minister. End of quote. It should have been clear from the outset what this FNLMA was about, since the framework agreement includes the following preamble. Quote, the parties wish to enter into a government-to-government agreement within the framework of the Constitution of Canada, end of quote. So the land code is passed. The First Nation becomes the federal agent corporation. The agent corporation provides consent in the individual agreement. Then the minister allows it to manage the surrendered reserves. The First Nation is acting in agent capacity because after the land code is passed, there still remains management tasks to be done once actual development proposals happen. The Minister of Aboriginal Affairs and Northern Development, as the minister then was, stays in charge for the big one, the overall surrender of the reserves via vote on the land code, because there is no way to fetter that Crown responsibility. Bracket Royal Proclamation 1763, and then after protects the Crown from anything done or not done by the First Nation Agent Corporation in Section 34 sub 3 and sub 4 of the FNLMA. Quote, Her Majesty not liable. Sub 3, Her Majesty is not liable in respect of anything done or omitted to be done after the coming into force of the land code of a First Nation by the First Nation or any person or body authorized by the First Nation to act in relation to First Nation land. Indemnification of Her Majesty. Sub 4, the First Nation shall indemnify Her Majesty for any loss suffered by Her Majesty as a result of an act or omission described in subsection 3. This is not a recognition of existing Indigenous jurisdiction. Indigenous jurisdiction is not within the Constitution of Canada. Rather, it is because of Indigenous jurisdiction exercised to enter the treaties that there is a lawful Constitution of Canada. It is not a regaining of jurisdiction by the Indian band. There is no transfer of control, despite people being told the FNLMA is how to regain jurisdiction. Hope to see you for our next part in Appleseed 2.0.